All right. Let's settle down, everyone. Settle down. We have a very special guest with us today, so I want to make sure we're all showing some respect, all right? This is Officer Steele. Officer Steele is here with us from the Sheriff's Department, and today he's going to be talking to all of you about drugs.
Oh, awesome, man. I hope you bought some free samples.
That's quite enough, Mr. Anderson, unless you'd like to spend the next 40 minutes speaking with the vice principal instead.
No, sir.
Yeah, that's what I thought. All right, I apologize for that, Officer Steele, but whenever you're ready, my classroom is all yours.
Well, thank you, Mr. McNulty, and good morning, students. I'm Officer Steele, and today I'm here to talk to you about the most dangerous epidemic in the world. Drugs, the silent enemy. Now, drugs are everywhere. They're on our streets, they're in your schools, hell, they might even be in your friend Kyle's basement.
Hey, man, he knows you, Kyle.
Come on, man, knock it off. Leave me alone.
You think this is funny? Here, let me show you what happens when you mess with drugs.
All right, now, here we got ourselves a photo of a typical teenager. Now, there's nothing wrong here. Looks totally normal, kind of guy you might know, right?
I mean, I guess, but what's up with those clothes, man? I mean, who the fuck is FUBU?
Yeah, all right. Ignore the clothes. I mean, the slides were kind of done a while ago, but here's a picture of the same teenager 6 months after getting hooked on drugs. Now, who here could tell me what is different?
Holy shit, man, that's a lot of Funyun bags.
Exactly. Funyuns. Always Funyuns. Telltale sign of addiction. And then before you know it, you're downtown trying to sell off your Nintendo Wii just to scrape together enough for a big old bag of Herb Your Enthusiasm. Oh, y'all still think this is funny? Well, let me tell you, if you're lucky, it stops there. If you're not, next thing you know, you're down behind the bus station doing favors for Dusty McHustle, trying to scrape together enough to buy 2 tickets on the Booger Sugar Express from Frosty the Blowman. That's right. Let me tell you something, buddy. Drugs don't care if you're the cool kid or that band kid who always smells like cheese sticks. Drugs will ruin you. And once you get bored with occasional hits of Skunky Brewster between playing rounds of Nose Candy Crush, you start moving on to the heavier stuff. Sandman Syrup, Dank Sinatra, White Lightning Delight, Sir Nods a Lot.
Are you okay, Officer Steele?
Am I okay? No, I am not okay. And do you know why? Because I care. You will lose control, you give up on your dreams, and spend hours Googling how to clean Funyun dust out of carpets. And before you know it, the only future you're going to have left is something like podcasting. And not some highly rated cerebral true crime podcast either. One of those bullshit ones like a bunch of losers who sit around talking about albums all the time.
Yeah, I kind of like that one.
Oh, shut the fuck up, Kyle.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back. This is Cory.
And this is Dave.
And this is Scott. Praise Satan.
Praise Satan.
As
indeed.
they say in Japan. Yes.
Yes, I'm sure they're all tremendous Satanists there in Japan.
Of course. Naturally.
Yes, they are. Yep.
Of course.
Satan and sushi goes hand in hand.
That sounds so cool, Satanic Sushi.
Ooh.
What a good band.
God, I just got a franchise idea.
Death metal band name. Satanic Sushi. Norwegian.
This is episode 2 of season whatever.
5.
Fuck season
5.
This is. 5.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh.
We changed it, for those of you who hadn't heard, we changed up the format last time a little bit. We are down to our final 16 albums. Last episode, we eliminated the first 2 of those. This episode, we're going to eliminate 2 more, and we're getting a little bit more technical about it. Instead of just free-form debate and discussion and then we all vote, we decided to kind of dig a little bit deeper and identify a few criteria. So on both of these rounds, we are going to be talking about these albums in terms of 4 criteria: production, songwriting, influence, and overall consistency. We will vote each one of those criteria, and of those 4 elements, whichever one takes home the most votes takes home the win.
That's how they do it in Japan, right, Scott?
That's totally how they do it in fucking Japan.
Okay. We ready to do this? Ready to do this?
Yeah.
Let's do this. Let's just jump into round 1.
Okay, we begin with 2 big British acts duking it out to move on in our March Sadness bracket. One is at the peak of their tenure, and the other is a one-off album that sparked a whole generation and movement of angry English punks. Our challengers, believe it or not, are Led Zeppelin with their Houses of the Holy album from 1973, ranked at 278, with some of the most solid work that Zeppelin ever did. especially coming off the success of Led Zeppelin 4 and not finding themselves in the shadow of a previous album. Led Zeppelin takes on the Sex Pistols, what we have called the original boy band, since it was Malcolm McLaren that drafted all the members and gave them their look, their name, and managed to get one album out of them. Never mind the Bollocks. Here are the Sex Pistols from 1977, and what we have is one uncompromising statement that captures the spirit of the London punks in its rawest form. Houses of the Holy fought its way here by beating out the album Aftermath, an early Rolling Stones album, and then battled by Elton John's Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, and finally took out Rage Against the Machine with their debut album. The Sex Pistols beat down the album Gree Gree by Dr. John, then toppled the modern-day punks of Green Day with their album American Idiot. Then they took out the ambassadors of the sad British twat music movement, The Cure, with their album Disintegration, and finally overtook Bruce Springsteen with his Nebraska album, Somehow. We will begin with the challengers and do our deep dive on Houses of the Holy.
Can you not do that? Can you not do that?
No, we're going to do it, Scott.
No, I'm talking to the cat.
Oh, okay.
Cat doesn't want to do it.
The cat's being an asshole.
Cat doesn't like the Sex Pistols either.
Fuck those guys. But we'll get to that.
All right, as I said, we have 4 criteria. We start with production, and hey, since I just referenced the Sex Pistols, let's just go ahead and start there.
Oh,
yeah.
Sure.
When it comes to production, there's sort of like 2 different definitions that people have of production, and so maybe I don't know how we're going to distinguish these. We're going to be careful to distinguish these. On one hand, production is just like the quality of the recording, right? And the other hand, production is sometimes producers will come in and they will add their own flavor to album, their own texture, using studio tricks, using ideas, what have you, to actually improve the music itself. When it comes to Sex Pistols, I'm going to focus really primarily on the former and the quality of the recording. It's really hard for us to judge that, or at least it's hard for me to judge that, because a lot of times when we're prepping for these shows, we are going back and listening to these albums on streaming services. Right? And they have been remastered and remixed so many goddamn times that you're not actually really getting the experience of the original album. So unless you were there, you don't really know how the original album sounded. This was one where I've actually listened to the original when it came out. Not when it first came out, but a few years later, but I did hear the original several times. This is not a well done album with all of those like remixes and remasters and special editions and everything that come out since. It is only just now that I can make out about half of Johnny Rotten's lyrics. The original pressing on this was absolutely horrible. Now, in fairness, you had 2 producers, Chris Thomas and Bill Price, that had to overcome a lot. Some of these tracks had to be produced twice because, remember, the band signed first with EMI. Then they got dropped by EMI after Johnny Rotten went on a rant on live TV. Next, they got signed by A&M. A&M recorded a few singles, but then they turned around and dropped them. And when they dropped them, they destroyed all of the singles. So when Virgin signed them as the third label, they had to go back and re-record all of those singles again.
And they had band member change-ups in the middle of all of that.
They had band member change-ups, and in particular, one band member, Sid Vicious, who could not fucking play.
No.
Right.
And they used, like, to their credit, they actually covered that up pretty well. First of all, by bringing in Matt Locke, the original bassist, and re-recording some of those parts. But then, not just Sid, but technical flaws all over the place. They did a fairly decent job using overdubs and echoes to kind of hide little flaws here and there. So, for example, the guitar here is actually, when you hear the rhythm guitar, it's actually multiple guitars overdubbed on top of one another. But it's actually mixed really well to the point where it sounds like just one guitar. It's really not a bad job considering the limitations of what they were working with.
Right, that guitar was kind of like a wall of sound, but I guess they were trying to make more of like a guitar assault, because, I mean, that's what went with the whole messaging of this. Yeah, it sounds like an assault. But yeah, that does work. And surprisingly, for comparatively most other punk albums we've heard, and to your point, this has been reproduced and remastered 1,000 times now, it does still come out better than other ones we have heard. All the other DIY punk albums and the lo-fi, which just means low budget, not give a shit of how it sounds. This does come out a little bit better, and I think that's more of just the McLaren formula. He wants to compete with other mainstream stuff. He doesn't want it to sound too shitty, but he wants it to still have like a raw shittiness that was the punk scene.
Yep.
So, not bad in the scheme of things. Scott,
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Not the production. Whereas that's what we're talking about here.
Production, yes.
The production's okay as far as that goes. And I'm to your point, Dave. Yeah, this is the first time I've been able to understand any of Rotten's lyrics. Really, the original record, which I had one, was terrible, like you said, and it was it was noise, it was angry, yeah. But it's garage rock before garage rock was really a thing in that sense. So production-wise, it's okay, and it's gotten a lot better thanks to streaming. But that's a whole nother thing altogether.
So let's shift gears and talk about Houses of Holy and production there. So here you have Eddie Kramer, who had worked with Zeppelin back on Led Zeppelin 3. He comes back, but he's kind of like producer in name only, because even if you asked him, he felt like his job was it was sort of like a Steve Albini, tell me what you want, and my job is to help you get there. He really saw Jimmy Page as the boss. He knew this was Jimmy Page's production. So they worked together and just really, once again, Page just goes in the studio and just really experiments and tries new things. You got a lot of guitar parts here, but unlike the Sex Pistols, where you have like multiple guitars blended down to sound like one, here you just have Page playing over himself and over himself and over himself. There are so many layers to these guitar parts, and it is so crisply recorded that usually you can pick out 3, 4, and even 5 guitars and listen to them and hear them separately all the way through the track.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's really crisp and clear. And then there had that other... Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was about to say, because that engineer had also worked with Hendrix, and they were recording at the Electric Lady Studios in New York City. But even with the overdubs, they still managed to keep that live energy that band has. Even with the overdubs, you're like, no, it still sounds like the live Led Zeppelin, even though you think they have 6 other guitar players on stage.
Page was kind of from that old school mentality too of, record everything cleanly and get it all just pristine. And it wasn't just a rush production. Page knew what the fuck he was doing, fortunately. So,
Yeah.
Compared to Pistols, it's like the night and day. Just like, that's just an excellent production. This is not so excellent. This is what happens when you rush.
They were also using the Rolling Stones mobile studio, which gave them flexibility to record in a lot of different locations. So a lot of this was recorded at Star Groves, which is Mick Jagger's house. They used apparently every room of that house because they just wanted to get the ambiance of pretty much every room they could, to the point where Kramer actually tells the story that at one point they took a Fender amp, stuck it in the fireplace, and shoved a mic up the chimney just to get the acoustics of like the sound bouncing around the brick chimney.
Oh, wow.
That's cool.
All right, I think we're ready to vote on this for production. Scott, what do you think?
Houses of the Holy.
Okay, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, again, Sex Pistols, Thomas and Price did an admirable job given what they were working with, but it doesn't come near to the Zeppelin album.
Yeah, I mean, they may have been herding cats with the Sex Pistols, but this really is Jimmy Page really honing his craft. And yes, the engineer, he was just there working, but overall they made it work. So yeah, this is a full production vote for Led Zeppelin, and we got to go on hold. So just mute me.
La 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 la. La 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 la. Gonna slam my dick into a door. Slamming my dick into a door. One is broken and the other one's.
Don't remember that on the Bananas Boy.
Mammy's little baby love choking. Mammy's I don't know why that came to mind.
It's the same melody.
It is the same melody. Yeah, it is.
So next is songwriting. So I guess you want to go to the Sex Pistols first?
Yeah, I mean, there's not a ton here. It's messy. It's not very sophisticated, but it's not really supposed to be sophisticated. It's punk.
Right.
Look, they were angry kids. They were trying to capture their outrage. They did that. There's a few really good hooks in here. There's a couple of interesting chord changes, but this is not a songwriter's album, honestly.
This is only going to influence a lot of people to say that I can write shitty stuff and it could sell.
Yes. They were more attitude than execution.
That's putting it bluntly.
I mean, there's a lot of hard-hitting power chords. I mean, they are catchy riffs. I'll give them that. I think that's the sound they wanted, and they tried to be somewhat anthemic as far as like getting people to sing along with God Save the Queen, Anarchy, and Oh My Lazy Sword. It's all sing along stuff.
The longest song on the album is Submission at 4 minutes and something, and that song just makes no sense lyrically. Even the music is just like, oh god, end it. Yeah, they should have kept everything 3 minutes or less, and they would have been spot on for that genre, I guess. But I'm being generous in saying that this garbage is songwriting, but it's garbage.
That song was apparently a fuck you to McLaren. What I just read about this, McLaren was trying to, when he put this band together, part of what he was trying to do was drum up publicity for his clothing store in London called Sex, and they had like a lot of like S&M equipment. It was like a sex shop. So Submission was supposed to be submission like in the sexual context, and apparently Rotten just like was pissed off about being asked to basically write a commercial, so instead he made the lines about a submarine rather than
a submission.
Trying to put together what they were talking about. It's like people, oh yeah, anarchy in the UK. So it's like, no, okay. Do you know what the MPLA is? And some of these other acronyms that Rotten was screaming about. Rage for the sake of making noise as opposed to actual outrage and actual protest. There's a lot to be said that these guys were not punk.
I've said before, like the only real reason they use the word anarchist at all in that song is because he was looking for something that kind of rhymed with Antichrist.
Right.
And Bodies is oddly, it seems like it's anti-abortion. Because of how descriptive it is. It's like they want to disgust you.
Lydon has since said that he's pro-choice, so who the fuck knows? But
Lydon goes back on a lot of things he says. So
he's pretty conservative these days.
Yeah.
All right. So anyway, look, not like I said, not a songwriter's album, but compare that to Houses of the Holy.
Lord.
This is, not only did you have some solid songwriting already, but as you said earlier, Cory, this is right after Led Zeppelin 4. There's a lot of pressure to basically just recreate that, but they wanted to go off in another direction. You had Plant, who was like a big fan of Mendelssohn. You have Page, who was like well-versed in pretty much everything, like folk, Indian music, flamenco. And so they start experimenting with all these different sounds, and they're combining like different elements of reggae and doo-wop and a cappella music. They let John Paul Jones play more keyboards, bring in more strings. So the songwriting was really, really pushing out in a new direction here.
And that was another thing I did notice going, kind of like a footnote to the production, was a lot of the keyboards and pianos that were used. Mm-hmm. They're crisp.
Very.
You can hear them.
Oh, yeah.
Even just a subtle piano, you're like, wait. The things you pick up with headphones.
Yeah, the proper production. Wow. What a concept.
Mentioning the reggae rock, I mean, the Dire Maker. Yeah. I mean, you look right from that, you go right to the Clash and the Police, blending in that reggae and rock that they did.
Even the crunge has that. The rhythm on that is so reggae /
It's this funky time signature that kind of keeps shifting. Yeah.
It's cool. I hate the harmonium on it. That womp, 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 womp. I kind of loathe that, but
it was their attempt at a James Brown song, and they could do it instrumentally. But Robert Plant singing, the crunch could have been
he was too white.
Yeah, it's true. It could have been an instrumental.
Apparently, the whole thing was sort of like tongue in cheek. They were trying to write a dance song that they knew nobody could dance to because of the time signature, and so they even I read this. They even toyed with the idea of putting like instructions on the liner notes of like dance steps to how to dance to the crunch.
It's just a step to the left.
Love it. Because so many people hate on that song, and I after listening to it again, though, I'm like, no, that's brilliant, man.
Don't get me wrong. Cool. Like I said, it's cool. I can't stand the Brits try to say, where's the bridge? I'm like, no, it doesn't work for you all.
Yeah.
Lord.
Overall, though,
the songwriting is really going in another direction here. I mean, so much so that it actually some people found it off-putting, and it's like, wait, this is a Zeppelin album? When it came out, it really wasn't the most well-received thing in the world because people sort of didn't know what to make of it. But that's just a testament to the experimentation.
And I think that happens every time a band tries to change up their sound.
Agreed.
You go from, you too, go from the Joshua Tree to Octune Baby.
This is the other interesting thing. The other thing that really points to the songwriting on this album is we've talked before how they did a lot of blues covers. Page has been accused multiple times of ripping off other songs. This is the only album they ever did that is 100% original material. There's not a single cover to be found here. And 0 allegations of plagiarism. Everything they wrote here was pristine, their own material. Nobody's ever stepped forward and said, you stole that from me.
To me, it feels like a progenitor in some ways to today's progressive music, and especially with the incorporation of keyboards into the rock element and blending those so seamlessly the way they did.
Oh, with no quarter?
And
Yeah.
That's
like a prog piece. Oh, yeah.
The Rain song, just woof. The Rain song always blows me away with how well that damn thing is written. And just, anyway.
All right, I think
I could go on for days.
let's throw out some votes. I'll throw in for Zeppelin on this one. Scott?
Yeah.
No brainer. I agree.
Definitely.
Zeppelin on songwriting.
All right, let's move on to influence. This one's a little different.
This one is definitely a little different. The Sex Pistols, we talked about earlier, it was not the first punk record, but it was a pretty major touchstone in sort of the development of punk. There were a lot of bands that came out after this. I think you had a lot of bands that either tried to sound like the Sex Pistols or listened to the Sex Pistols and said, hey, wait a minute, these guys kind of like found their own way to be themselves, and so we're going to do the same thing. So it really did set the template for punk for quite a while after this. And not just punk. It was embraced by the metal community. You've got Motorhead, Metallica, Megadeth, Guns N' Roses. They were all fans of this album. Nirvana, talked before, the Nevermind album was actually named after this album, which actually kind of annoyed Johnny Rotten at the time. Everything annoyed Johnny Rotten at the time. And even in Oasis, Noel Gallagher of Oasis, here's a direct quote, I made 10 albums, and in my mind, they don't match up to that, and I'm an arrogant bastard. I'd give them all up to have written that. I truly would. Like it or not, like it did influence a hell of a lot of people after this.
I wonder how much of that was said, though, knowing that kind of a comment would get a rise. Because fuck you, Noel Gallagher.
Well, he's a detention hound, so I mean, yeah, that's not.
Yeah, sad British twat.
The other points about like you can't really argue with Motorhead and Metallica and GNR and.
Nope. Agreed. You know, a lot of people saw angst there, and that's what the music was angry for the time, so it certainly does come across that way. And yeah, it did have that influence. So, like it or not, no, it's not a good album, but it certainly set the tone.
Yeah, I mean, we know that the foundation will always point back to the Stooges, but the basement was built with the Sex Pistols, the Clash, and the Ramones. Between those three, they're the pillars of what held everything else up from there.
Minor Threat was in there.
Yeah, but countless acts, and especially with the heavy guitar, the raw energy, the provocative lyrics, everybody Dave named, they all fit that description. Huge influence.
And then I try to go find people who claim to be influenced by Houses of the Holy. And there aren't. It's one of my, if not my favorite Zeppelin album. I think there's a lot of good here, but you just don't hear a lot of people coming forward to saying this inspired me to pick up a guitar or to write this song or whatever. For whatever reason, maybe because it really wasn't well received when it first came out, but for whatever reason, it didn't seem to have a lot of influence on what came after it.
I think more of an indirect with the whole genre fusion. I think that did give other bands like Queen a little bit of a open door to say, yeah, you can do a lot of different stuff on your album. We did mention the Dire Maker with the reggae, so that's the Clash and the Police, and even some of that acoustic folk rock that they were doing. So Rain Song, of course, Over the Hills Far Away. There was a mention of Heart, and I was like, really?
Heart. Wow.
And then I heard Bebe Lestrange again, and I hear that song and I go, oh, that's a Zeppelin song. Oh my God, what a
Ann Wilson's a huge fan of Jimmy Page. Huge fan. So, yeah, there's obviously people bowing down to the master.
And a little bit of the prog rock. So, like we mentioned, No Quarter. I can see where Rush and even like Dream Theater picked up from this. To Dave's point, those were kind of hard to find. True. So, in the influence category, with this particular album, I'm going to say the Sex Pistols.
Yeah, me too, actually.
Yep, same. Unfortunately.
Okay, final round, consistency. Who do we want to start with?
Well, let's stay with the Pistols to be consistent.
It is kind of the same thing over and over again. That was it. You find a new sound, you find something you're trying to sell, you try to beat it into the ground, and it is a short album, so it's not like it goes on for a double album of it. It does have a decent balance of some of the higher energy and the slightly more, I guess what you'd call melodic, air quote, songs. Pretty vacant and submission. I always found that funny, Dave. You're right. Space mission. What I found, what was ironic is there's a certain kind of uniformity in the album to a band that's against anything that's uniformity when they're so anti-establishment.
Whether you like it or not, first of all, this is going to be really hard because I generally, in terms of consistency, and I'm just talking like consistency with themselves, this is actually a fairly tight competition between these two albums. What I found with the Sex Pistols album is there's about 3 or 4 songs there. 17, Liar, New York are the 3 that like I find the least bit engaging. That's about a third of the album. Houses of the Holy, people will disagree with me on this, but the Crunge, I don't think anybody's going to disagree with me on. The Crunge, I've never particularly cared for. The Ocean, this one I'll definitely get pushback on. Over the Hills and Far Away has never actually been a favorite of mine. I know.
Go to hell and die. You're wrong.
So you got Sex Pistols with about a third of the album of low points. If you, just for my own measurement, Houses of the Holy, that's also about a third of the album, those 3 songs. And by the way, like, people will disagree on which tracks are better and which ones are worse, but like, I'm not alone here. When this album, we talked about all these albums came from the Rolling Stone Top 500 Albums of All Time list. Well, when Houses of the Holy originally came out, Gordon Fletcher from Rolling Stone wrote that it was, quote, one of the dullest and most confusing albums I've heard this year. So like, I'm not alone in this assessment. I do really like that album, but there's songs there that I find low points as well. That said, I'm just going to go ahead and vote. I will say that Houses of the Holy, the failures are noble attempts. Like the Sex Pistols were, to your point, Cory, just doing the same thing over and over again, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. Every single song on Houses of the Holy, they're trying something new, and just sometimes it didn't work as well. And so, based on that, I'm actually giving it to Houses of the Holy here. This was challenging for me.
Scott?
Yeah, consistency. Okay, I'm going to make this real simple. I didn't look at, no. There's just a solid no. There's no consistency on the Sex Pistols. I'm sorry. Yes, there's a solid amount of consistency, but no, you're right. You mentioned the Crunge, the Ocean, Dire Maker even. Those songs did have, they wobbled on the consistency factor, but this, to me, this felt like a songwriter's album, and every song is just so well crafted. Even the ones that I don't care to listen to a lot are
That's kind of what I mean by they were noble attempts.
The Pistols is just nothing but, okay, here's 30 minutes of noise, bam. There you go. Here's your 30 minutes noise. And it's a lot of the same noise. It's just so repetitive and it's boring. The album is boring except for a couple of little highlights, which is God Save the Queen and Anarchy in the UK, which everyone knows. No one else could name another song off that album. So frankly, I give this to Houses just because, fuck you guys. You didn't belong here at Pistols. You're going too far. You got too close to the sun.
Okay. Consistency wise, yes. I did say that the Pistols were kind of doing the same thing over and over again, but there's a flow to it. There's a straight line that, yep, you can listen to it throughout. Yeah. You're not like... I don't think there's anything I completely dislike.
Like, my toilet has a flow to it.
Yeah, well, the low flow.
My piss has a flow to it.
But
the little dribbles in the end, that's what the Sex Pistols are. Wow.
My only thing with Houses of the Holy is the Crunge. And so with just that one, it's not enough to...
That's a brilliant piece of music.
It is, but and you know what? It's an experiment, and God love them for taking that chance. And
that's what I mean by even the failures were noble attempts.
Yes.
Right. They did it because we don't have to.
So I'm going with Zeppelin, and that gives them 3 or 4 categories. And Scott, would you like to bid adieu to the Sex Pistols?
Right, fuck off.
Perfect. Okay, well, since we were talking about the Pistols and a lot of the anger and a lot of the shit that goes with them, with everything pretty much in rock and roll that dates back, and I meant to do some follow-up on like earlier references, but didn't get there. Drugs.
Yeah, I have some earlier references for you. Yeah, so we for our middle part discussion here, we got you something special. Drugs. So there's a lot of drugs in today's episode. We just talked about Zeppelin, who did plenty of drugs. Zeppelin, we're never going to get back to the story, so I might as well tell it. So when they were doing this tour for Houses of the Holy, they rented a plane, a private jet, like a passenger jet that had been converted. I mentioned it last time. The jet actually had its own fireplace. It was called the Starship, and a lot of acts use it.
How does that work?
As I understand it, it was sort of like faux fireplace, like it wasn't actually like
Okay,
a wood burning.
all right.
But still, it was called the Starship, and a lot of big acts used it in the 70s, including after the Houses of the Holy tour. The same plane was used by the Allman Brothers and for their tour in 1974. And when they boarded the plane, on the bar, spelled out in cocaine, were the words "Welcome Allman Brothers." So yeah, a lot of drugs going on at this time.
Praise Satan for those days.
That's a lot of coke.
That's a lot of coke, but not as much coke as Fleetwood Mac did when we talk about them in a few minutes.
Oh my God.
So we're also going to talk about the Rumours album. They did a lot of coke, so much in fact actually that when they wrote the credits for the Rumours album, they actually considered thanking their dealer in the album credits on the album sleeve. And the only reason they didn't do it was because he ended up getting killed before the album came out.
What a bummer.
Yeah, what a bummer. So yeah, long history of drugs and music. We can talk about why that is, but like just to kind of put this in perspective of how long this has gone on. Harry Styles, I just found this out when I was prepping for this show. The Fine Line album that Harry Styles came out. Apparently he did most of that album under the influence of mushrooms because it thought it helped him be creative. Mozart used to drink quite a lot before he would sit down and record. Before he would sit down and compose.
He used to use a 4-track, but hey, this was a long time ago.
It was was it a Foster? I think it was only a 2-track.
It was a Fostex, yeah. A little Fostex.
Another classical composer, Berlioz, from the 19th century, wrote a lot of his music under the influence of opium. So like this goes back quite a way.
Yeah, baby. Aerosmith, you weren't inventing the wheel.
No.
This is at all mediums of art.
Yeah.
A lot of musicians who do a lot of drugs will tell you that they think it inspires their creativity, that it kind of opens up these pathways in the brain and makes them think about things in a different way. There have been studies on this. There have been multiple studies, however, that suggest that that is absolute bullshit. So there was one study that was done where they tested subjects with psilocybin, which is the same stuff that's in magic mushrooms. It made people feel like they were more creative, but when they actually gave them exercises and tests on creativity, they consistently underperformed relative to their sober state.
I wonder though, can you really measure that? I mean, is that something that's subjective? Completely.
Well, let me talk about some of the other tests. I don't have the methodology on that particular study.
Yeah, I would be curious.
There's another university, Leiden University, did a test examining the effects of weed on what they call divergent thinking.
Johnny Leiden University?
I was wondering the same thing.
Different spelling.
I want to go there, yeah!
One of the ways that drugs supposedly help you be more creative is this concept called divergent thinking, where kind of you start thinking outside the box. And so what they did was they had a control group that got no drugs whatsoever, one group that they gave 5.5 milligrams of THC to, and another group that they gave 22 milligrams of THC to. And they used tests to measure divergent thinking, and they found that the lower dose groups didn't get any impact whatsoever, positive or negative, and the higher dose groups actually got a decrease in divergent thinking. There was another study in Okinawa that tested LSD using neuroimaging. They gave folks LSD and basically put them in functional MRIs, and they found that there was decreased restraint in the brain, so it kind of freed people up to think differently, but it also decreased the ability to organize and categorize and differentiate the conscious experience. So in other words, like, you get these novel perceptions, but you lose the ability to turn around and apply them into anything constructive. And so like one researcher said, what we hear about in the media is people who successfully enhance their creativity using drugs, but you don't hear about the example where someone took drugs and passed out and therefore their creativity was lower. Which one researcher did acknowledge, like, there are some circumstances where it might help. So for example, if let's say you take acid and you have this vision and you can retain enough of it to turn around and paint a picture of the vision you saw, that might help. But for the most part, what they found was like, yes, the thinking either freed up in some cases, but the actual execution doesn't, is the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
The subjective point I was going to get to was it wasn't just the taking of the drugs, it was also what you were subjecting yourself to at the same time. So
true.
You dropped some acid, you got stoned, and then you put on, maybe it was Dark Side of the Moon. Maybe it was a Jam album, and something from that sparked something in your brain under that influence. Or are you saying that they would have been influenced regardless of their state of mind? That's where I'm going with this, because you could have just said, you know what, I'm going to trip balls and I'm going to go to the Museum of Modern Art. And you're going to walk out there and be like, wow, I saw the painting completely differently and it gave me this idea. That's where I'm going. It's not just the drugs by themselves. It's an external factor that feeds into it.
Experiencing art while under the influence of drugs is a well-known pastime across the eons. So everyone gets that.
Most of these tests, they were kind of testing inspiration and execution simultaneously.
Yeah.
I think it might be a different story if you could test those things separately. In other words, like get people high, see what it does to their brain, but then let them sober up and then see how much they take away after the fact. Like it seems like you're a lot of times you're probably better off if you get high, have some ideas, let it wear off, then execute those ideas while you're clean.
I like to piddle around on my guitar while I'm stoned, but I find that most of the stuff I write is when I'm stone sober.
Right.
So, it's just better. And I know this.
Give people some acid and be like, all right, 2 test groups. We're going to subject this one group to Baby Shark, and we're going to subject this other group.
And they'll still all want to kill themselves by the end of it.
Exactly.
Just no!
But
Baby Shark. Sorry.
But of course, there have actually been a lot of songs that were written while high, and so I think we collected a list of some of our favorites. Corey, I don't know if Corey or Scott, if you have any.
Yeah. So I did find She Said, She Said by the Beatles, and it was apparently John, George, Ringo, and Peter Fonda all together dropping LSD. Peter recalls a childhood near-death experience, and of course, when you combine talking about death when you're tripping up, is apparently not a very good mix, because everybody starts thinking about their mortality all of a sudden. Little clues in the songs is She Said, I know what it's like to be dead, is being part of the trip, and I know that I'm ready to leave because you're making me feel like I've never been born. So the whole mortality, and they're just that one they claim they were tripping when they wrote the song. That was one of them.
Yeah, the Beatles could almost be like a college level course in writing while high, because they did an awful lot of it.
That's true.
Actually started earlier than I think people even realize. It really started, according to Paul McCartney, with Rubber Soul and the song The Word, that they had gotten high together before, but they always kind of had this approach of, well, you don't actually do work while you're high. You get high for fun. You don't actually do work when you're high because it's going to affect quality of output. Well, The Word was the first song where they like smoked some weed, sat down and wrote lyrics together, and then after the fact went, this is kind of good. We ought to just go with this. So that was like,
who knew?
So Rubber Soul was the weed album. Then they move on to Revolver, and LSD enters the picture. Tomorrow Never Knows. This is a big track that is clearly LSD influence. Lennon was reading this book called The Psychedelic Experience, and following the instructions of the book, he went home, dropped acid, and started meditating, and then comes out this track. And the first line of the song, turn off your mind, relax, and float downstream, pretty much tells the story of how the song was written.
That's step one.
I Am the Walrus, same deal.
Oh, God, yes.
Cuckoo.
Lennon wrote that over 2 separate acid trips. He wrote the first line was on one acid trip, and then the next weekend he dropped acid again and wrote the second verse to it. So this is when he starts getting a little bit more surreal.
Yeah.
Those were the days.
And then there was the time Lennon almost died, when they were recording the song Getting Better. So they were in the middle of recording Getting Better, and they're taking various substances, and Lennon thought he was taking some uppers, and all of a sudden he feels like shit and knows what the hell is going on, and he goes, I got to get some air. And so everybody like walked up to the roof of the studio to stand up on the roof and just get some fresh air. The rest of the band walks back downstairs and starts working again. And he's just going to come back down and meet them when he's feeling a little bit better. And it suddenly dawns on them, wait a minute, holy shit, he must have taken acid. And they run back upstairs to grab him because they're like, holy shit, if we can't leave him alone, he could just wander off the roof and that'll be the end of John Lennon.
We won't talk about that.
Yeah, the Beatles had a lot of examples. Others?
I mentioned the songs about drugs, but it was written while on a trip. Was Go Ask Alice.
Yes.
White Rabbit, Jefferson Airplane.
White Rabbit.
Yeah, that's
a fun song, even though it's so stupidly simple.
Oh, yeah, but it was Grace Slick's LSD hallucination, and then she just decided to tie it into Alice in Wonderland.
You kind of have the other one that I wanted to mention was the Doors, The End.
Ah, yes.
Morrison, of course, did every substance under the sun, but that song in particular, especially the end where he rants off about wanting to have sex with his mother and murder his father and the whole Oedipus Rex thing. He was high as a kite on acid. And so that really like inspired that whole moment of him just ranting. It also inspired at one point for him to come into the studio and notice the glowing red light on the console and mistake it for a fire and grab a fire extinguisher and spray down the entire studio with a fire extinguisher. So again, maybe getting high and working, not the best combination sometimes.
Wow.
So other examples are now songs that are about drugs in one way or another.
Yeah, my favorite here are the ones that people don't realize they're about drugs. And once again, I'll start with the Beatles. Got to Get You Into My Life is about weed.
Yeah.
McCartney has said in an interview, it's actually an ode to pot, like someone might write an ode to chocolate or a good claret.
Thank you, sir.
And I didn't know that Bad by U2. It was about a friend that they lost to a heroin overdose on his 21st birthday, and a bunch of friends had gone out and they bought enough heroin to kill him.
Wow, I didn't know that either. I had another U2 song that I only in prepping for the show that I found out was about drugs. As a song I've never really understood the meaning of it, I guess, but it was called Running to Stand Still off the Joshua Tree album. So that song is about a couple who lived in the Ballymun Flats in Dublin. The Ballymun Flats is this collection of 7 buildings that were built as like low-income housing in Dublin. So there's the line, I see 7 towers, but I only see one way out. Bono had grown up in a neighborhood nearby and had watched these towers being built. As is often the case, they started with good intentions, but there was poor maintenance and people not caring about the place, and eventually a lot of drugs entered the community and just became not a good scene. And Bono ultimately heard this true story about this couple that had lived there, spending so much money on their heroin habit they couldn't afford the rent. The guy takes up a work running heroin between Dublin and Amsterdam, and it's just the whole song is just about this kind of like cycle that they were trapped in and trying to get out of it.
Wow. And then you could take the Talking Heads one.
Oh, yeah, Talking Heads. So Talking Heads was about And She Was, which is like this happy little dippy pop song. Doesn't sound like much at all. It's actually about a girl that David Byrne knew when he was growing up in the Baltimore area who, I love this quote, took acid while lying in the grass near a Yoo-Hoo factory. I don't know why the Yoo-Hoo factory was important, but
that could be very important. You never know.
So she basically took acid and described later having this out-of-body experience and like floating up over herself and over the town and like all this consciousness of everything coming together. And that's what And She Was is about, was that out-of-body experience.
And of course, I mean, real quick, we'll cover this, is that as much as they all love their drugs, they all come to realize the damage that they do and try to get out of it. Or they experience the loss of a friend, a bandmate, a family member to drugs, and then it does affect them differently, and it does affect their music as well.
It does. Red Hot Chili Peppers, Under the Bridge, which is really about Anthony Kiedis quitting heroin and coke and everything else he was taking, and then kind of went through this period of struggling, feeling like he was distanced from the rest of the band who were still doing a lot of that shit. So the Under the Bridge was kind of this song that he wrote about the depression of being sort of out by himself in his sobriety.
Needle and Damage Done, we've talked about before.
Neil Young, yeah.
We could go on, but I think it's time that we wrap this up and we remember those fallen albums.
Yes. Don't do drugs, kids.
Yes.
Drugs are bad, okay?
But yes,
right.
We'll take a moment to remember some of the albums that have come and gone with our In Memoriam segment, and we will be right back.
Here's 4-time CMA Award winner, Kathy Mattea.
In the past year, in addition to the great Tammy Wynette, we lost several other beloved members of our country music family. They brought the joy of music and laughter to millions, and we'd like to take a moment tonight to remember them.
Bob Dylan, Blood on the Tracks. David Bowie, Scary Monsters and Super Creeps. Let It Be by the Beatles. By the Beatles. Neil Young, After the Gold Rush. David Bowie, Station to Station. Bob Dylan, Blonde on Blonde. The Rolling Stones, Beggar's Banquet, 808s and Heartbreak by Kanye West, Rust Never Sleeps by Million, On the Beach, also by Million, Born in the USA by Bruce Springsteen, Slater Kinney, Dig Me Out, Meet the Beatles by the Beatles, Continuum by John Mayer, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road by Elton John, The Beatles, Revolver, Led Zeppelin 2 by Led Zeppelin, Born to Run by Bruce Springsteen, and The Freewheelin' Bob Dylan by Bob Dylan.
All right, we ready?
We're ready.
Ready.
Okay, the second matchup is as lopsided as they get. What we have are two immensely influential albums on opposite ends of the musical spectrum and at opposite ends of the country. Our challenger is Nas with his Illmatic album from 1994, ranked at 44 with some of the best rapping combined with masterful storytelling, the likes of which we had not seen since Rakim had hit the scene. The album is dark and gritty and mostly real, something of a counter-narrative to the glorified West Coast gangster rap by conveying what it really means to try to live, thrive, and survive in the violence, the drugs, and the struggles of the early 90s. Nas, however, is taking on one of the most successful albums of all time, and that is the 1977 Fleetwood Mac album Rumours, ranked at 7. It is a timeless piece involving love, heartbreak, betrayal, and the resilience that still resonates with audiences today. Nas got here by stomping over Sparks with their Kimono My House album, then easily beating out the noodling Allman Brothers with their At Fillmore East live album, followed by a knockout punch to Frank Black and the Pixies with their Doolittle album, and finally kicking Bob Dylan and the Coolions with his Highway 61 Revisited album. Fleetwood Mac has been torching through the competition easily, taking down David Bowie's Low album, Bruce Springsteen's Born to Run album, and then Smoking Out the Chronic by Dr. Dre. So let's take
Kicked it right in the ghoulies. Yep.
So let's take a trip down to Queens, and we start with the production of Nas's Illmatic.
So this is, like I said in a prior round, production has two ways to measure it. One is just the sound itself, and the other is actually people adding their own ideas. And hip-hop producers play a really key role because all of those beats the rappers are rapping over are usually have producers behind them that are actually creating those beats. And this one had 5 separate producers. There was Pete Rock, Q-Tip, DJ Premier, Large Professor, and LES. Apparently there were 5 pretty well-known producers in the New York hip-hop scene. Originally, Nas wanted Large Professor to do the entire album, but Large Professor was tied up with other things and just couldn't commit to the full album. Because Nas had already earned this reputation for having such an immense talent, everybody wanted to work with him. And so, like, when he couldn't get Large Professor for the whole thing, all these others flocked in and said, that's okay, we'll do it. It was not entirely uncommon for rap albums to have multiple producers at that time, but usually when it happened, it was either they were all running with the same crew, or the label had some sort of in-house team of producers that they were assigning out. This was really sort of one of the first albums to kind of build a dream team approach where they just got the best producers they could find and put them all together to work on different tracks. It could have been a shit show because they were all sort of doing their own thing. It could have been a situation where they were trying to outproduce one another and nothing worked together. But it really kind of bred this kind of friendly competition where one producer would listen to a track that another had done and say, damn, I got to up my game. And so they would bring in something different. And there really was this kind of collaborative effect, though, over the whole thing where you still get a pretty consistent sound to this album, despite the fact that all these different people worked on it.
Some of these producers, I did make note. So DJ Premier then worked with like Eminem. He's worked with Kanye, Jay-Z, and even Limp Bizkit. Pete Rock, that you mentioned, was part of Public Enemy's Bomb Squad.
Did it all for the nookie.
And also worked with A Tribe Called Quest. And of course, Q-Tip was pretty much A Tribe Called Quest. And he'd also worked with Kanye, Jay-Z. He did an album with Jack White in 2022. And apparently in 2024, he did an album with LL Cool J, which I did not know he released one this year. Unaware of that. And their collective techniques and, you know, utilizing the jazz and soul samples were very well done. And I think a lot of those jazz samples, we can point back to Q-Tip on this, because that's what we heard on the Low End Theory a couple of years before this album came out.
Yep.
Yeah, as they noted that, like, the production for this, it helped cement that characteristic sound that would influence New York hip-hop as a genre for years to come, just literally.
Yeah.
So
the sound was gritty. It was raw. It sounded and felt like what he was describing of the 1990s Queensbridge. What they were doing in the background, it was complementing what he was doing. It was not overshadowing it at all.
I found out a lot of that stuff in the background are like old mixtapes he had of himself on a couple of tracks. Where he has something playing in the background, and it's like, oh, that's cool. So you're kind of mixing your own other stuff in under. It's like a song within a song, and you just
meta.
Very clever.
Very meta.
Very clever.
But then meanwhile, we get to Rumours. And so Rumours is really a good example of the other piece of production here, which is just the recording quality itself. And Ken, I'm probably going to butcher the last name. Ken Calais. Oh, that was what I was going to say. Good.
Calais.
Ken Calais and Richard Dashut co-produced this and really set a new standard for the quality of sound recording. They were using what was then relatively new 24-track recording technology, which allowed them to capture much richer layered sounds. There was a lot of that going on too with Lindsey Buckingham. We're writing multiple guitar parts and layering them, but it's not just the guitar parts. Like it's crisp and clear throughout. The drums are amazing. The harmonies, the bass lines. Once again, just like the Houses of Holy album, you can pick out pretty much any instrument anywhere in the recording.
To your point, I was going to compare this to the accuracy of a Steely Dan album, where every instrument and every vocal part is clear and distinct.
Yeah, I agreed. Agreed.
Yeah.
They did have their share of challenges they had to overcome too. One in particular, as they were recording, at a certain point, the tapes they were using actually started to lose their oxide coating. Now, magnetic tape there's this oxide coating against a backing layer of plastic, and the oxide coating is the part that actually captures the sound. And these tapes, they ran back and forth through recording equipment so much that they started to break down, and the oxide coating started to separate away from the plastic coating or the plastic backing on the tape, which means the music was literally falling off the masters. Fortunately, they had done some early recording sessions laying down just backing tracks, and those early sessions, they still had the same problem. They were using those tapes, but in those early sessions, they were simultaneously doing a second backup recording, and they still had those backup recordings from the original. So they had to rush to get the overdubs and everything that they had done for months on top of those backing tracks. They had to get that transferred on top of that original backup tape. This was way before the time when you could do that via computer. It was manual 12-hour shifts of literally cutting and pasting tape over to the other masters. All had to be done by hand, but they managed to save every single recording.
Yeah, this is one of those cases where this was an early case of multi-tracking, and they're cited as part of how good the production was. It's just like, wow, the innovation in particular with editing this.
The meticulous attention to detail.
But that issue with fixing the tapes that were shedding, literally this entire album could have been lost, and it's this rare instance where the producers literally saved the entire album.
Yeah.
Well, I think they did more so than just all the technical stuff. I think hurting the cats of a band that was fighting.
God.
Yeah, I give the producers a lot of credit here.
Yeah.
Even though they were the ones that were like, we've got to bring in more coke for the band, especially on the Tusk sessions. They were babysitters. Ken and Richard are unsung heroes here to this album.
And a large group of people that were very hands-on. I mean, they've said that on this album, nothing went out as final until every single member of the band agreed on it.
And that's shit. You barely get the three of us to agree on anything.
That's true. Yeah.
All right. Production. Scott, what do you say?
Production. That's what we were just talking about.
Who do you vote for here?
Oh, voting for
Sorry.
it. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to go with Rumours because as much as well done as Illmatic is, it's still that lo-fi. It's a lot of copy-paste, and it's from 94 as opposed to this is from 73, and just wow. So night and day on the production. And this again, Rumours is a case of how good production can be if you really want it to. And it's a master
class of music production is what it is.
Yeah, it is. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful album.
So I'm going to vote Fleetwood Mac on this one. Dave?
Well, not that it matters since you guys both voted for Fleetwood Mac, but I probably would have gone with Nas here just because, again, Scott, you mentioned these tracks, those sounds, those samples just really shaped an awful lot of hip hop after this.
Yeah.
And that wouldn't have happened without that dream team of producers. So, but you guys have voted, so it's Fleetwood Mac.
Fair.
No. You still put one vote down for Nas. All right, so back to Nas and the songwriting.
Oh, yeah, that could become relevant. That's right.
Yes.
Perhaps.
We did have it in the last show.
Yep.
So his storytelling, so in songwriting, is amazing. It's very vivid. It puts you right in the scene. It's incredibly well done. And like I said, this was a counter narrative to where the gangster rap of the West Coast was kind of glorifying it all. And Nas was kind of like, yeah, there's nothing pretty about this. If you have to live in this and you have to deal with this every day, it's not all the hype you hear about from the West Coast.
Right. And his ability to kind of relay that story, apparently, like growing up, I guess there were indications because apparently growing up, like he was always the kid that was like sitting outside with a book in hand. It is the storytelling, the lyrics, the complex internal rhyme schemes. We've referred to him in the past as the hip hop Hemingway, but there's this other guy, Brandon King, at a website called hiphopgoldenage.com, who referred to him as a hood Langston Hughes.
Ooh.
Which I thought was a really good choice, too.
I like that.
And he wrote from the perspective of an observer. Like an awful lot of hip hop, to the extent it was talking about these issues at all, they were written from the perspective of the participants, right? The guy on the corner telling about the day-to-day battle, selling drugs and fighting with other gangs. Nas is kind of approaching this more like a reporter and as a third-party observer. He still goes hard, but he's watching rather than participating, which I think makes it more impactful as well. And we've said it before. When he's writing this, depending on which track you're talking about, he's anywhere from 18 to 19 years old.
Yeah, he's really young.
Dropped out of high school in 9th grade.
Right.
Uh-oh.
So like just the writing would have been stellar for somebody with like a master's in literature, but from a 9th grade dropout who's 19 years old, that's amazing.
Yeah, there's a brilliance with his balance between street wisdom and his introspection. You know, you go from survival, hustling in one moment, and then reflection and personal growth and his ambition and loyalty, all of which he learned from everything he had done, and crafting that and putting it together. His storytelling is to rap what Nebraska is to folk rock. The imagery is just incredibly well done.
Okay, so we just talked about Nas songwriting. Should we just jump to Rumours songwriting?
So with Fleetwood Mac, we've got three distinct songwriters. You've got Christine McVie, Stevie Nicks, and Lindsey Buckingham.
Yes.
Now, what I will say is Lindsey is the through line through all of them. He doesn't take credit on their songs, but his contribution to their songs, I think, is what makes them as stellar as they are. Because of what he does for his guitar parts, for what he does on backing vocals, how he chooses to, what instrumentation he chooses to put in on some of these songs. I think that's the brilliance of the songwriting here, where it's like Lindsey's kind of like that through line that is a constant.
I think my personal view is Lindsey Buckingham kind of single-handedly saved Fleetwood Mac, because they had, prior to this, the original Fleetwood Mac was sort of a British blues revival band, just like every other British blues revival band that had been around.
True.
Buckingham comes in, he brings Stevie Nicks with him, and it really expands the sound. And like you said, Cory, now all of a sudden they have not just one really solid songwriter in Christine McVie, but three really solid songwriters coming in. And so this was not the first album to add them in. There was one other before this one.
It was self-titled Fleetwood Mac.
Yeah.
And that's where we get the song Monday Morning from, that a lot of people know.
But this is the album where Buckingham really starts tying a lot of things together. The Chain is a perfect example. Like, they had all these snippets and pieces and bits that they really couldn't, none of them were fully fleshed out songs, and it was Buckingham comes in and in relatively short order finds a way to piece all of them together by adding like the kick drum and the dobro to tie it all together.
And really, The Chain, when I listen to it again right now and I put it in perspective of the album, it's almost as if it's a metaphor of it. It's the music that keeps them together, or rather ties and binds them together.
Well, yeah, I mean, we've talked before. A lot of these songs were written in moments of personal turmoil. A lot of them had been in relationships with each other. Those relationships had gone south. They'd moved into different relationships with each other. They were doing a shit ton of drugs. I mean, Gold Dust Woman is all about Stevie Nicks dealing with her cocaine addiction.
Yep.
All of this personal conflict they channeled into the music. And Christine McVie actually in an interview said that the only way we could really communicate with each other at that point was through the music, because it was the only platform where we had everything in common. And so like they're not talking to each other on a personal level anymore, but they're talking to each other through songs because that was the only way they knew how to do it.
Passive aggressive approach.
Yep.
But it was cathartic and it worked. And I know that Dave, you're no fan of the Christine songs.
No, that's not universally true. Like
Okay.
I actually really like Songbird. It's Oh Daddy, I think is a little bit weaker,
Right.
but yeah.
I think that they are a warm and optimistic counterbalance to the vitriol in the room. And I mean, Songbird, it's just that perfect little fade out on side one, and then you get punched with the chain when you go to side two. Yeah, we just fade out and want to go to the other one nowadays, but whoever paired that up made that decision. Well done.
Well, let's go ahead and vote on who has the better songwriting here.
There's so much going on. Yeah, it's save time. I'm also voting for Fleetwood Mac here.
Yeah,
Dave?
yeah, me too. I'm with Scott. It's as much as I respect like the lyricism and everything on the Nas album, like there's just more musical variation on Fleetwood Mac, and
yes, exactly.
With Rumours too. We're unanimous.
Okay,
Were you
so now
magnanimous?
Magnanimous. How kind of you. So influence.
Another tough one. You know, Rumours, you've got one of the best-selling albums of all time. In fact, so much so that Stevie Nicks was once quoted as saying by the time the 70s were over, they were getting so sick of it that every time they'd hear one of the singles on the radio, they wanted to puke because they just really never wanted to hear those songs again. But
I'm sure it's also a reminder of where they were when they wrote the songs.
It was, well, yeah, that's true. I mean, it was everywhere in the 70s. It's remarkably, it's still everywhere now. It seems like new generations keep discovering this album. Just in February of this year, it passed 5 billion streams on Spotify.
Wow.
It is the most streamed album of the 1970s on Spotify. It's huge. And you've got, I mean, the artists that are out today, Taylor Swift, Adele, Haim, they all like take inspiration from it, especially this sort of aspect of putting personal feelings and emotions and candid experiences into their songwriting. So it's had quite a bit of influence.
It has. In fact, since you mentioned covers last time, every single song on this album has been covered. So if you go to secondhand songs, Never Going Back Again. Okay, wait. I'm just going to hit the big ones. Dreams. You want to take a guess how many cover versions there are?
Oh my God. Yeah, I would have to say dozens, but I don't know.
137.
Yeah, holy shit.
In second place is Second place is Songbird at 120. And then Go Your Own Way at 92.
Well, Landslide I know has been done a ton of times.
Landslide's not on this album.
Oh yeah, no, you're right.
but to your point, Landslide has been done plenty of times.
Had a Scott moment there.
And I mean, even Oh Daddy at the lowest was 11.
Oh Daddy, yeah. Yeah, Hank Williams Jr.'s version. You'd like it. It gives you a gritty take on the song.
That's a weird point of comparison in this particular instance, though, because hip-hop, like, covers are not really a thing.
Yeah.
They do sample each other, though.
They sample each other, but I'm not sure that I've ever heard a rap album that was like, or a rap song that was covered by another artist.
Well, I have heard rap songs that have other rap songs in them that they sampled.
Oh yeah, I mean you get the
And
sampling, the
there.
interpolations and stuff, yeah, but it just covers aren't a thing. You know what I mean? You don't actually cover somebody's song.
Difference here was that Fleetwood Mac they created a distinctive California sound that endured as a sonic touchstone for so many bands, whereas Illmatic introduced a lot of stylistic trends in the New York rap scene.
That was one of the influences. I've actually brought back the New York rap scene because of it.
Yes,
by this
exactly.
point, a lot of stuff had like shifted to the West Coast with Dre and that
Right.
California sound. And so this album comes out. Not only does it get a 5 mic rating from The Source, which apparently was pretty rare at the time. They actually said, and Cory, you alluded to this, this guy is the second coming of Rakim. He took the complex internal rhyme schemes and flow that Rakim did, and he just amped it up to 11 and took it to a whole nother level. But then he was also this like savior of New York and bringing hip hop back to the East Coast and making New York relevant again in the rap scene. Just like Rumours, an awful lot of artists. You have guys these up to this day, Eminem, Jay-Z, other people that like they just cite this as a huge influence for them when they were coming up.
Rakim brought with the rhyme schemes. Nas built upon that with his storytelling. You're right. Took it to 11. Took it to the next level.
Yeah. Now there was one aspect of the Nas album that created a legacy, but maybe not such a good one, and it comes back to this idea of having multiple producers on the same album. Because as I said before, like a lot of times before, you either had the same producer for your album throughout, or you had guys that were working together on behalf of the label, for example. This idea of like building this super team of producers for each individual track, it worked really well here. And there were a lot of albums that said, oh, we need to do that.
Oh, yeah.
It led to all of these producers coming in, and you started getting a lot of follow-up albums trying to do what Nas did, and not having it go so well, because it's kind of like one thing I read was, imagine a movie, but they brought in a different director for every single scene. You lose that cohesion and you end up with this unfinished work product, and it generated a lot of albums that had that as a problem.
I think a lot of these producers were respected, but they weren't as greatly well known at the time, so that made that a friendly competition rather than them coming in with their own egos and competing. And I think that's what then happened subsequently with other artists was, well, this producer came in and now they're this big so-and-so and they're expected to do all this great shit, and so hey, I'm the one with the big dick in the room, not you.
Right.
And that causes and that hurts the artist's album in the long run when the producers are all measuring dicks in the studio.
Makes things awkward, that's for sure.
Yep.
So as far as influence, yes, they were both influential in their own way. What endures more, perhaps, is I think the musicality across Rumours, whereas the musicality on Illmatic is there, but I don't think it's as quite as...
Well, I'll tell you what. So, Scott, it sounds like you're going for Fleetwood Mac here. I'm probably inclined to go for Nas on influence, simply because they were both super influential albums, both influenced a lot of artists, but Illmatic was one of these genre-defining things. Like, for the next 10 years, every album was trying to be Illmatic, and every hip-hop album, anyway, was trying to be Illmatic. And Rumours had an impact, but it didn't have that quite broad genre impact like Nas did, so I'm actually going with Illmatic on the influence.
Fair enough.
And Scott, your vote was Fleetwood Mac?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm leaning towards Illmatic on this one. Don't get me wrong. I love Rumours, and yes, its influence is... I think it's a lot broader than Illmatic, but Illmatic did have a huge impact within its own genre, like a tremendous impact. Whereas, yes, Fleetwood Mac in rock and country and alt rock and all sorts of other places, it's overreaching, but I think Nas at least needs to get credited here for what he did for hip hop. So I'm going to give a vote for Nas. And that moves us into consistency and fluff.
Consistency and fluff. And, I people will disagree with me on some of those Houses of the Holy tracks, and people are going to disagree with me here. We mentioned it. I don't really care for Oh Daddy. As much as I think Buckingham is a genius, and he really is, as much as I think he is an absolutely brilliant guitar player, there are a couple of tracks, I think sometimes his melodies just leave me a little bit cold. I'm not a big fan of Secondhand News. I'm not a big fan of Never Going Back Again. The Nas album, however, by comparison, it is remarkably consistent, and some of that has to do with circumstance. Like I said, he had generated a lot of respect before this album came out. As a result, there was a lot of anticipation for this album, so much so that bootlegs started going around. Tracks would leak out of the studio, and people would get like these early copy bootlegs or things performed live, and Columbia starts to freak out and thinks, oh my God, we're going to lose money because these bootlegs are just going to suck up the entire market. Nobody's going to want to pay for our album. So as a result of that, they rushed the final album, Illmatic, out the door. They rushed it out so quickly that the result is you have this album that's actually about 10 to 15 minutes shorter than the average album length of the time. As a result of that shortened runtime, there really was just less room for fluff. I take Scott's point about like it can get a little bit same sounding. There's not as much musicality from track to track, but man, the intensity level and the execution level is pretty damn I'm solid. And so I'm here once again. I think I got to go with Illmatic.
All right, Scott.
To agree with you there, actually, consistency is one thing, and there, I'm sorry, you get all these cokeheads together. There's no consistency. It's all over the fucking place. And whereas Nas was very fucking focused, and so I give this to Illmatic.
I have to still go the way the album flows for Rumours. Yes, it does kind of in and out. It does have a lot of the same theme, and Christine's songs balance it very well. And knowing that we have that one through line of Lindsay, I like the Lindsay songs. I think he's brilliant. And so I have to go with Fleetwood Mac on this one.
Okay.
All right. Well, we once again have a tie then, because Rumours took the production and songwriting categories, and Illmatic took the influence and consistency categories. So we move on to absolute votes. If we add up all the votes from all four of these across all four of these categories, which one just got the most raw votes? Cory, do you know?
Nas got a total of 5 votes. Fleetwood Mac got a total of 7.
Okay. Well, then there you go. Then Fleetwood Mac moves on.
Had I voted with you all, it would have been a perfect tie.
They will not stop thinking about tomorrow now.
We would have gone to the bonus round, and we probably would have had to have talked about Mick Fleetwood's balls.
I don't want to talk about his balls.
Well, we would have had to, because it would have come in.
Unless we slam him in a door. And maybe we could get him on the show, and maybe Mick Fleetwood will let us slam his balls in a door. That'd be a great bit.
This round means that Rumours moves on to our Elite 8 round, so we may yet talk about Mick Fleetwood's balls.
Tell you what, if Mick hears this, hopefully he'll get in touch. And
he's more than welcome.
Set it up. Yeah.
Anybody's
great
welcome.
to have him on. Slam his dick in the door, balls, whatever, either or.
All right, so that gets us halfway through our round of 16, and the next time we will pick up right here where we left off with 2 more rounds. And if you want to listen to albums in advance to know what the hell we're talking about, here's what you'll be dealing with. Next time we will have Rubber Soul by the Beatles taking on Blue by Joni Mitchell. Not necessarily Mick Fleetwood's Blue Balls, but Blue by Joni Mitchell.
Oh my God.
Next. Sorry, it was
there's a visual.
It was a stretch. I stretched Mick Fleetwood's balls.
Yeah.
In our second round next time, we will have Steely Dan's Asia, which we mentioned earlier, going head-to-head with Some Girls by the Rolling Stones. And maybe Scott will be back by that point, and maybe he won't, because once again, his internet connection has crapped out.
We'll give him a moment. Otherwise, we can hit the button without him.
There he goes.
He's gone.
Scott just dropped from the call altogether, so bye.
Yeah, until next time. Bye-bye. If he comes in, it's too late. I'm hitting stop. Oh, wait.
All right.
Oh, there we go. Hey.
Yeah, just tell Frank to push the button, Scott.
No, okay, Frank, I was just talking to you because I knew I was still recording, so I did a whole thing. So there's stuff here at about the 15-minute mark.
Okay.
So I'll push the button.
Cory goes to mix all this. We'll find out what you just said.
Here you go.
Hear a word of it.
Push your button and get. Okay, here we go. 5, 4, 10, 20. Clearly, my thing is messing up with y'all, but I'm still talking, so you're going to hear this, Cory, and you're going to be like, yeah, but we were talking and you were talking, so we're talking about different things, and then it's going to get really weird for about here. So I'm at 50. I'm in the 15 minutes area on the recording. Yep, I figured that was happening.